My name is Daniel Matthews, and what I am about to share is the most terrifying experience of my life. It happened in the fall of 2012 during a hunting trip in the deep woods of northern Pennsylvania. I've been hunting since I was a teenager, and the woods have always been a second home to me. But this trip was different. This trip would change everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. It was early November and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. I had planned a solo hunting trip to my favorite spot, a secluded area about 10 miles from the nearest road. I arrived at my campsite in the late afternoon, set up my tent, and prepared for an early morning hunt. The woods were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant calls of wildlife. As night fell, I sat by the campfire, enjoying the solitude. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. The fire had burned down to embers, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the trees. I crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling the exhaustion of the day's travel, and quickly fell asleep. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night to an eerie silence. The usual sounds of the forest were absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. I lay still, straining to hear anything, when I noticed a faint rhythmic tapping coming from outside my tent. It sounded like someone lightly tapping on the canvas with their fingers. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize the noise. Perhaps it was a branch brushing against the tent? But the tapping was too deliberate, too consistent. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly, peering into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the blackness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. The tapping had stopped. I scanned the area, my breath visible in the cold night air. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I retreated into the tent, still on edge. As I lay back down, I heard it again. Tap, 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 closer this time. I sat up, gripping my flashlight and hunting knife, my heart pounding. Suddenly, a low whispering sound began, unintelligible but unmistakably human. It seemed to come from all around me, as if the woods themselves were speaking. Panic set in. I knew I was alone, miles away from any other human being. I decided to leave the tent and confront whatever it was. I couldn't just sit there, paralyzed by fear. I burst out of the tent, shining my flashlight in all directions. But there was nothing, only the silent, dark forest. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped outside. The silence was deafening. I stood there, shaking, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed, but nothing did. Convinced it must have been my imagination, I went back to the tent, leaving the flashlight on next to me. I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to every little sound. Hours passed, and I finally drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up at dawn, feeling uneasy, but ready to start my hunt. The events of the night before seemed distant, almost like a bad dream. I packed my gear and set off deeper into the woods. The morning was quiet, and I managed to spot a few deer tracks. As I followed them, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midday, I reached a small clearing and decided to take a break. I sat on a fallen log, eating a sandwich, when I noticed something strange on the other side of the clearing. It looked like a makeshift altar made of stones and sticks, with strange symbols carved into the trees around it. I walked over to get a closer look, my unease growing with each step. The symbols were unlike anything I had ever seen, intricate, almost tribal in nature. As I examined the altar, I heard a rustling behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but saw nothing. The woods were silent again, as if holding their breath. I took a few steps back, suddenly feeling like I had crossed into forbidden territory. The air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. I decided it was time to leave. I started back towards my campsite, walking quickly, my senses on high alert. The forest seemed darker, more menacing. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. As I neared the campsite, I noticed something was wrong. My tent was torn to shreds, my supplies scattered. It looked like an animal attack, but something felt off. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. I grabbed what I could salvage and decided to head back to my truck. It was still daylight, but the shadows seemed to lengthen with every step I took. The feeling of being watched was now unbearable. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something following me. About halfway back to the truck, I heard the whispering again. It was louder now, more insistent. I broke into a run, panic driving me forward. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, until I could almost make out words. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't stop. I could feel something behind me, closing in. I reached my truck just as the sun was setting. I threw my gear into the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I glanced into the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and dark, with glowing eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I hit the gas and sped away, not daring to look back. It took me hours to calm down after I got home. I told my wife everything, and she could see the fear in my eyes. We decided not to tell anyone else. They wouldn't believe me anyway. But the memory of that night haunted me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. The feeling of being watched never left me. A few weeks later, I did some research on the area. I found out that there had been reports of strange occurrences and sightings in those woods for years. People spoke of ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and even disappearances. The symbols I saw were believed to be part of some ancient, forgotten ritual. I never went back to those woods. The experience left me shaken and changed. I still go hunting, but I'm much more cautious now, always aware of my surroundings. The events of that night made me realize that there are things in this world we can't explain, things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. To this day, I can't forget the terror I felt in those woods. The memory is as vivid as ever, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that can lie hidden in even the most familiar places. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the fear I experienced was real, and it left an indelible mark on my life.